Last year, I made the ultimate survival food, pemmican. Dried bison meat and fat pressed into a brick that's meant to last for a long time. Well, it's been a long time, a year in fact, and now I am going to use it to make rubaboo, the pemmican stew of Canadian Mounties and explorers. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video, as I hope my pemmican hasn't gone rancid. This time on Tasting History. So at the end of last year's video, I tasted the pemmican, and frankly it was greasy and kind of bland. But I also mentioned several ways to spruce it up. Often they would add sugar when making the pemmican, but if you already had your pemmican made, you could add it as an ingredient to other dishes. And perhaps the most famous of those dishes is rubaboo. A rubaboo. Now, where exactly this term comes from is a matter of conjecture, but many people agree that it is probably a combination of the French roux, meaning something that can help thicken a sauce or a stew, and abou, which was a term for different types of soup in several Algonquin languages. And the fact that this is possibly an amalgam of two very different languages is fitting because the dish itself is an amalgam of two very different cultures. It was first made by the Métis, who were the people descended from both the indigenous of Canada as well as the European traders who came to Canada in the 16th and 17th centuries. And as the Métis worked closely with the traders and explorers of the 18th and 19th centuries, it's no wonder that both pemmican and rubaboo became staples for anyone venturing out into the Canadian wilderness. Now, finding historic mentions of this dish is kind of difficult. One, because there are a lot of spellings, including rababoo, rabibo, and rababoo. Another reason is that sometimes it's just called pemmican stew. And when I could find mentions, they're hardly recipes. Like in the 1821 diary entry from British trader Nicholas Gary. Our men are now eating rababoo made of pemmican and flour. Survey says, not a recipe. A somewhat better description comes from Sam Steele, a famous Mountie and soldier and all-around badass in 1874. Pemmican was cooked in two ways in the West. One, a stew of pemmican, water, flour, and if they could be secured, wild onions or preserved potatoes. This was called rubaboo. The other was called by the plain hunters a réchaud. It was cooked in a frying pan with onions and potatoes or alone. Some persons ate pemmican raw, but I must say that I never had a taste for it that way. Other mentions from around this period talk about adding things like corn or different greens and herbs and spices and sometimes beans. All sorts of things could go in to make it a rubaboo stew. So really, whatever you add is going to be fairly authentic because there is no real recipe. If you want something concrete written down, you're better to look at the wonderfully written recipes from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. As we head into fall, I find that the grocery stores tend to get rather packed. Long lines, people fighting over the last bell pepper, not that I've ever had to do that, but America's #1 meal kit, HelloFresh, will deliver all the ingredients you need for dinner right to your door. And everything is pre-portioned for you and your family so you can get straight to cooking. You can take your pick from an array of 40 weekly recipes, including vegetarian and family-friendly options, and they have a great selection of seasonal meals like the cranberry Dijon pork tenderloin and cherry balsamic chicken with Brussels sprouts. Last night, I made the one-pan cheeseburger lettuce wraps, all the flavor of a delicious cheeseburger with the lightness of a lettuce wrap. I also love that HelloFresh gives you the options to swap out different sides or different proteins, or even just add more protein if you're feeling extra hungry. So to give HelloFresh a try, go to HelloFresh.com and use my code 50tastinghistory to get 50% off of your order plus free shipping. That's 50tastinghistory at HelloFresh.com. Now, while I can get HelloFresh delivered right to my door, it was not an option for the Canadian Mounties in the 19th century stationed up in the Yukon and Northwest Territories. So, if you want to eat like them, what you'll need is a ½ pound or 225 grams of pemmican. And to make pemmican, I will put a link in the description to last year's video where I made pemmican and explain how to do it because it's quite a lengthy process. A ½ cup or 60 grams of flour, 2 onions diced, a few potatoes, about 2 cups chopped, some herbs, and some salt and pepper to taste. So first, break up your pemmican into a bunch of little pieces. I forgot just how greasy this stuff was to handle. But it's a good thing because it's that greasy fat that's going to melt out when you put it into a pot over medium-high heat. Keep it moving around until you start to smell it cooking. Mine sort of smelled like cooking sausage early in the morning. Then add in the onions and toss them around with the meat and the fat, and let them cook for about 5 minutes until they're lightly browned, and then add in the flour and get everything well coated. Now you can actually add all of the ingredients into just some boiling water and you will have a rubaboo, but I find that cooking the onions and the meat beforehand is going to really give you a lot of nice flavor, and adding the flour after you add the water, it's not going to cook, and so it's going to kind of taste floury and it can kind of clump. It's just not going to thicken quite as well as adding it before. Adding it at this point isn't exactly making a roux, but it does allow it to mix with the fat and cook a bit, so it's more like a roux. After 3 or 4 minutes of cooking, it should have a nice nutty flavor, and then you can pour in about 1 liter or 1 quart of water. If you want it a bit thinner, just add more water, but I am looking for a nice thick stew, so I'm sticking to 1 quart. Then add in the potatoes along with any herbs or salt or pepper that you care to add, then let it cook over a medium heat for about 20 minutes. This will give the stew time to thicken up, and it'll give us time to talk about the Canadian Voyageurs and Mounties and how they ate their rubaboo. So when I made last year's video on pemmican, I really thought I had exhausted all of the pemmican writings that I could find, but boy, what was I wrong. I came up with a lot of new things when I was doing research for this, so I'm going to share some with you right now. First are the writings of Robert Peary and Matthew Henson, 2 American explorers who made several expeditions to the Arctic together and claimed to have been the first explorers to reach the North Pole. Though there is question to whether they actually did make it to the actual North Pole. Regardless, they traveled a long way, it was really cold, and their chief foods were pemmican and hardtack. Now hardtack, or biscuits as they were sometimes called, were hard. It's right there in the name, and so they had to often be cooked in some way or else like dipped in water or tea just to soften them up. And it turns out the pemmican sometimes was the same way too. In Matthew Henson's writing from March 2nd, 1909, as they crossed the ice of the Polar Sea, he said, "Breakfast has warmed us up a bit, but the hard pemmican had torn and cut the roofs and sides of our mouths so that we did not eat a full meal. And we decided that at our next camp we would boil the pemmican in the tea and have a combination stew. I will say now that this experiment was tried, but it made such an unwholesome mess that it was never repeated." To be fair, a very popular drink at the time was beef tea, so pemmican tea kind of makes sense, I suppose, though obviously it didn't work out. But also, to be fair, there is no tea in beef tea. It's just really beef and water and some other ways of boiling that down, similar to
hot ham water.
But it's likely that the pemmican that they were eating up in the Arctic was not all beef, or ham for that matter, because most of their pemmican came pre-tinned from American factories. And no one but the makers knew how much cat, dog, mule, and horse meat masqueraded in the pemmican under the guise of beef. But regardless of the meat variety, it did not work to steep the pemmican in tea. But that doesn't mean that they didn't keep trying to make it into a stew or rubaboo. On several occasions, Henson says that the evening meal of pemmican stew and tea was prepared, the dogs were fed, and we turned in. What I find interesting is how 2 men who spent so much time together on this voyage had 2 very different recollections of exactly how they enjoyed their pemmican. See, Robert Peary wrote that in all my expeditions after the first one, when some members of the party made themselves sick by eating too much pemmican stew, no attempt has been made at cooking or even warming the pemmican ration. So maybe it was just Henson who cooked his pemmican into a rubaboo, because Peary does seem to have preferred it raw. Frankly, he just loved pemmican. In his memoirs, he says, "Of all foods that I am acquainted with, pemmican is the only one that, under appropriate conditions, a man can eat twice a day for 365 days in a year and have the last mouthful taste as good as the first. And it is the most satisfying food I know. It has invariably been eaten like a piece of cake or pie, just as it came out of the tin." To be fair, cake at that time was a little bit drier than it is today, but I still think the comparison is a little off base. But he loved pemmican. In fact, when he was talking about how to pack the dog sled that was going to be taking him, he ditched his sleeping bag, thus allowing its equivalent weight of more pemmican to be carried. I mean, it's important, I'll grant you, but so is a sleeping bag when you're going to do that sleeping in the Arctic. Another really interesting thing about his writings is the inclusion of a photo. It shows how all of the different rations were packed so that they would stack on the sled. There's compressed tea, condensed milk, pemmican, oil, alcohol, dog pemmican, and hardtack. And when I say dog pemmican, I do not mean that it was made from dogs, but rather that it was meant for the dogs to eat, because Perry says that pemmican is the only food for dogs on a serious polar sledge journey. Now, another person who wrote quite a bit about both pemmican and its use as rubaboo is the author of today's recipe, Sam Steele, who not only had a really cool name, Sam Steele, but also had a really cool life. He was famous for being a tough, stern, and no-nonsense kind of guy who was kind of like the Canadian version of Chuck Norris. But instead of being Walker Texas Ranger, he was Sam Steele Canadian Mountie. Not only did he fight in the Boer Wars and World War I, but he was also one of the first Canadian Mounties to bring law and order to the wilds of Western Canada. And during the Klondike Gold Rush, he earned the nickname Lion of the Yukon. When he arrived in the town of Skagway in February 1898, it was 30 below zero, and the gambling hells, dance halls, and variety theaters were in full swing. Soapy Smith, a bad man and his gang of about 150 ruffians, ran the town and did what they pleased. Robbery and murder were daily occurrences. Many people came there with money and next morning had not enough to get a meal, having been robbed or cheated out of their last cent. Sam Steele and Soapy Smith. You can't make these names up, they're just fantastic. Anyway, the Klondike Gold Rush at the very beginning was, like most gold rushes of the past, absolute pandemonium. And then Sam Steele got to town. Being Canadian, he wasn't about to let that gold rush be an ill-mannered one, so in just a few months he cleaned out the vermin, and anyone who didn't follow his rules, he sent packing. He turned that place around, and the Klondike Gold Rush is now famous for being one of the most orderly in history. How very Canadian. And while he was cleaning up the West and on all of these different adventures, he was often eating pemmican and rubaboo. For pemmican was the favorite food of the traveler on the plains and far north, and the mounted police used it for years. He tried to make sure that his men always had plenty of pemmican and flour so that they could make rubaboo. But one time when they were on the river near Lake Winnipeg, a terrible wind came that stopped them from progressing any further. It kept up for several days, and as we had only a few pounds of flour, we were soon out of rations and had to shoot seagulls. These and tea were all we had to keep us from starving. But finally the wind subsided and they were able to move on to the next outpost. And here we procured a small supply of pemmican, tea, and flour. And that night, when mealtime came, we landed to cook our stew of pemmican and flour and boil our tea. So perhaps I should make myself a cup of tea as I dish up a bowl of rubaboo. It should take about 20 minutes, but you'll know that it's done when it's thickened up and the potatoes have become nice and tender. And here we are, the rubaboo of the Canadian wilderness. I gotta say, it does not look too appetizing. It kind of reminds me of like black bean soup, but there are no black beans in it. And it's not really soup, it's definitely a thick stew. You can make a soup if you add more water. But while it doesn't look appetizing, it actually smells really, really good. The whole house smells really good. It just kind of smells like a meat stew. And that's really what it is. It's just that the meat is a year old, and I'm about to eat it. Okay, here we go. Get some of everything in there. The flavor is really good. The texture of that meat is weird. It's kind of chewy. What does it remind me of? It reminds me of like ground beef that is really fatty, like it has a lot of chew to it. And it is a really fatty meat, so that makes sense. But I'm actually surprised at how much I enjoy the flavor. It's hearty. I could see eating a big bowl of this. Even now. Even more so if I was out in the Canadian tundra. It needs the onions and the potatoes and a little bit of that spice and herbs. Otherwise, I think it would be very, very bland. Which, you know, is what it is. But if you've got some of those ingredients, add them in. Sometimes they would have added corn and lots of other things, other beans, black beans, and just to spruce it up. So add whatever you want, but you're still getting that pemmican flavor. It's just lifted by the other ingredients. What I also find amazing is that this is year-old meat, and it tastes pretty much the same as it did the day that I made the pemmican. So that's kind of awesome, I think. I'm curious if I get poisoned in the next few hours. I don't think I will, because with meat especially, you can usually smell if something has gone off. Didn't smell, tastes great. Go make some rubaboo. And if you don't want to make some, at least say rubaboo, because it's a lot of fun. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.